Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Isle of Skye by Mcgoldrick, narrated by Ruth, Urquhart. Prologue. Drummond Castle, October 1502. His ice-blue eyes locked on the castle looming in the gathering dusk. Silent as death, he and his company of killers climbed the ridge toward the open drawbridge. Andrew would get back what was his. He would have his revenge. Fiona bounced across the wood floor at the sound of horses thundering across the drawbridge. Standing on her tiptoes, she stretched her 5-year-old body, inching her dimpled chin up onto the stone ledge surrounding the small window in her effort to peer out into the dusky light at the approaching riders. From the unglazed slit in the castle wall, the misty autumn wind swept damply through her fire-red hair. She could not see the riders, but she could hear their steel armour clanging as they rode into the castle's inner yard. Her father was coming for her.
"May I please go down, Nana?" she asked for the umpteenth time. "Please, Nana."
"You know what your mamma said, child," the old woman responded, smiling at the irrepressible excitement of the little girl. This was a big day for her. This was a big day for them all. Fiona skipped from the window and picked up her little stool from beside the fireplace, carrying it quickly to the high window and scampering onto it. As she pressed her face into the opening, a gust of Scottish night air filled her with a thrill of anticipation. But her mother had given strict orders that she was to remain in her room until she was called for.
"He must be very important," the little girl thought excitedly, trying to pick him out from among the horsemen in the courtyard. In the flaring torchlight she could see the varied array of tartans and the company of men dismounting below. Though Fiona could not even recall when exactly she had last seen her father, she tried hard to remember, as her eyes scanned the sea of men below, what he looked like. She had been very little the last time, but there were things about him that she could still recollect, vaguely. His deep and easy laugh, his soft red beard, the strange belt-like chain that she could feel under his shirt. Her mother had told Fiona that her father always wore that, but she had never said why. "Your papa is a busy man, Fiona," her mother had said the time she'd asked for him. All her life Fiona had been hearing talks of fights with the filthy English who were trying to take Scottish lands. And all her life she'd been hearing her mother tell her how Papa had to help, how it was his job to help keep their homes and their countries safe. But now he was coming to them, making a special visit, to take her and her mother and Nana back to his own castle, to be with him. For the past week, Fiona had been shadowing Nana as she went about her chores. The little girl had tried extra hard to be more of a help than a hindrance. After all, she had so many questions about the upcoming visit, and Nana was the only one who had even talked to her about it. Fiona wished she could remember more. For as long as the little girl could recall, no one would ever talk to her about her father. There were moments when her mother would allow Fiona a glimpse of those times when he had been near, and it was during those talks that Fiona would hear about his humour, his courage, about the kind of man he was. But then her mother would never answer her other questions about him, so he remained an enigma. Sometimes Fiona wondered if her father still loved her. She wondered if he missed her as much as she missed him. Sometimes she even dreamed of him. When she did, he was like an angel, floating far above, away from her, but watching over her. She could see him, his red hair and beard streaming around him as if blown by a gentle breeze. And now everyone kept telling Fiona not to disturb her mother. The little girl knew that her mother was not her usual self. She had been very quiet for the past few days and spent many hours alone in her room. Fiona heard her crying. Nana said that her mother was just having a hard time believing that what she had wished for so long, was finally coming true. But Fiona knew it had to be something else. During their time together, Nana had told her that, for reasons beyond their control, Fiona's parents could not be married up until now, but that their love had finally triumphed. At last, her father had told his people that Fiona was his daughter, and that he and her mother were going to be married. Fiona was not really sure what being married meant, but she knew it had to be something very special. After all, she was going to have a permanent father now.
But even more importantly, she knew that it meant her mother would never have to be sad again. Nana had told her that. Fiona began to count the torches that were being lit in the courtyard. She knew her father would have warriors with him. Nana had said Fiona's father had many who attended him. "Fiona, come here so I can braid that wild hair of yours," Nana scolded gently, smiling patiently at the excited child. The room was warm and comfortable, and the old woman felt at peace with the world. The little girl reluctantly turned from her place at the window. Hopping off the stool, she ran across the room, flinging herself affectionately onto the woman's lap. Nana put her arm around the child, returning her warm embrace. Nana had raised the girl's mother, just as she was now helping to raise Fiona. They were so different, mother and daughter, and yet so much the same. Margaret had always been the proper child, always reserved, always private. But Fiona was different. Nothing was held in, nothing was hidden. One thing Nana knew they had in common, though. They both had such incredible depths to their love. Fiona squirmed in her lap, breaking into the woman's reverie. Nana picked up the brush and began to run it through the silky softness of the little girl's hair.
"Nana, is my hair really the same colour as Papa's?" she asked, turning her bright eyes on the woman.
"Aye, child, that it is."
"And my eyes, Nana?"
"Nay, child, you have your mamma's hazel eyes. Your papa's eyes are the colour of a March morning. Yours change with your mood and with the colour of the sky."
"But I do look like him, don't I, Nana?"
she asked hopefully. Her mother had always said that Fiona resembled her father. "Aye, lass, you look like him, and you have his wit, and his restlessness, and his high spirits as well. You are his very own child, Fiona." There had never been any question whose child Margaret had borne. He had been here at Drummond Castle beside her when Fiona had taken her first breaths in this world. Nana had seen the tears of joy washing his handsome face. And then, later on, Nana had seen the tears of sorrow on that face when he had to go. As the woman braided the little girl's locks, she thought of how often she had done this same simple task for her mother as well. Margaret Drummond, eldest of 3 daughters of John, Lord Drummond, had grown up to be one of the most beautiful and sought-after maidens in all the realm. As a young lady of the court, Margaret had been pursued by princes and earls and lairds, as well as by knights of every calibre. But she had turned her face from matches that had promised security and respectability. Instead, Margaret had accepted an impossible love. She had been swept away by a man beyond her reach. A man whose life and destiny were not his own to control. Nana had watched her grow from childhood and had always known her charge would never accept anything less than the union of 2 souls. For Margaret, impossible as it was, this love was forever. Margaret had known the consequences of the relationship and had left the society at court when she had found herself with child. She had withdrawn to Drummond Castle, away from the prying eyes of the court gossips. She had secluded herself, even from much of her own family, content to raise her child alone, hoping all the while for his return. And then he had followed her, to be with her during the pain of her labour, to share with her the tears and later the joy, to bask in a brief glow of happiness before the world had pulled him away, as it would again and again, but always with the departing promise that he'd come back as soon as he could. But then, one summer day he'd left and he hadn't returned. This time had been different. His world had kept him away. 2 long years had come and gone before the news of this impending visit had reached Drummond Castle. The skirmishes, the politics, all had conspired to keep them apart until now. Nana knew that through these past 2 years, Margaret had clung to the certain knowledge that she was loved by the man who had fathered her child. Time had passed, though, and Nana often wondered if he had changed. But now he was about to make Margaret's dreams come true. Their dreams, Nana thought. All of their dreams. The sound of the door's latch startled the old woman from her thoughts, and she sat bolt upright. The door opened and Margaret rushed into the room, pushing the heavy oak door closed behind her. Her eyes flickered across the room in search of her child. Finding her on Nana's lap, Margaret's face visibly registered her relief. Fiona leaped up and ran into her mother's arms.
"Mamma, is it time?"
the little girl asked hesitantly, sensing something was wrong. "Oh, my poor baby," her mother responded in anguish, hugging the child tightly to her. In an instant she turned her troubled eyes toward the older woman. "Nana, we have no time. Take the back stairs down to the great hall. Find Sir Alan and have him come up here immediately. Then go out to the stables and have them ready 3 horses. "What's wrong, my lady?" the older woman asked, rushing to her mistress's side. Margaret's bright eyes flashed toward her daughter. Loose tendrils of blonde hair fell around her perfect face, now filled with obvious distress. "What I've feared for the past few weeks has finally happened," she answered quickly, struggling to fight back tears. Her face was flushed with her effort to restrain 1,000 emotions. "You must take Fiona away from here. But first go and do as I have said. I'll send her down with Alan. And please hurry." The older woman was torn between the desire to know more of her lady's distress and the need to comply with the urgency of her command. But one look at the fear in Margaret's eyes catapulted her into action, and she bustled quickly out the small door at the rear of the chamber. As the door closed behind the retreating woman, Margaret's hand went to the leather purse in the pocket of her dress. Wrapping her fingers around it, she could feel the dead coldness of Andrew's brooch, and beside it, the ring, its heat burning her fingers through the leather. She had to hide them, and she had to hide them now. Her eyes swept around the room. "Oh, God," she thought. "Oh, God, but where?" And then she remembered. With a sharp cry, she ran across the room to the fireplace. Counting several stones over from the opening, Margaret pulled one from the wall. Fiona just stood there in the middle of the room, confused, but knowing deep within her heart that something was wrong, terribly wrong. She could see the small dark space behind the wall and watch her mother yank a small leather purse from the pocket of her dress, jamming it into the hiding place. Quickly, Margaret shoved the stone back where it had been and whirled on her daughter. "Fiona, my love," she said, crossing the floor quickly. "Run and get your heavy cloak and the leather purse I gave you."
"But, Mamma,"
the girl protested.
"what is wrong?"
"Go, child. Hurry," the mother said quietly, trying to control the panic in her voice. "I'll explain in a moment." Fiona ran to the pegs by the door and pulled down her winter cloak. As she turned back, she could see her mother writing furiously at the small study table. Tripping to the chest by her bed, Fiona took out the purse. By the time the little girl reached her side, she had folded her letter and tipped candle wax onto the paper, which she then sealed, using her ring. "Give me the purse, Fiona," Margaret said, reaching for the bag. She stuffed the letter in the purse and removed the ruby and emerald-encrusted cross that was hanging from the gold chain around her neck. Drawing Fiona to her, Margaret placed the chain around her neck and discreetly tucked it inside her dress.
"Mamma!"
Fiona looked wildly at her mother. For as long as she could remember, her mother had worn the cross close to her heart.
"You said Papa gave you this."
"Aye, my love," Margaret answered, tears now coursing freely down her cheeks. "But I'll not be needing it, and you will."
"But, Mamma, I don't understand. Papa is coming."
Margaret looked at her bewildered daughter. She was hardly more than a bairn. How would she survive this? "Listen to me, child. We have only a moment." Margaret looked around furtively. Time was running out, but where were Nana and Alan? She continued, "An evil man has come into our home. Not your papa. Do you understand me? Your papa does not even know of the evils that surround him. He is innocent of this." Fiona tried to understand her mother's words. What did she mean? The words swirled through her head. Papa was not coming. Innocent? Of what? Why did her mother no longer need her cross? Who was this evil man? Fiona began to cry, hiccuping and sobbing as her mother tucked the leather purse inside her clothes. Margaret then wrapped the heavy cloak over Fiona's shoulders and tied the leather thongs at her neck. "Listen to me carefully, Fiona," Margaret continued. They were both weeping now, and she wiped her daughter's tears from her flushed face. She cupped the innocent young child's face with her shaking hands and looked intensely into the worried eyes. "I need you to be very brave. You have to go away,
to a place where you'll be safe, and you have to stay away until your papa comes to get you."
"But why isn't he here?" Fiona cried. "Where is papa now?"
"I wish I knew, Fiona. But the evil men are already here. These men will hurt us, my love. It is too late. You must go. But listen to me. This is most important."
Margaret knelt beside her child and held her tightly with one arm as she pointed to the wall where she had hidden the packet.
"When your papa brings you back here, show him what is behind that stone. He will punish the evil ones who have come here tonight. I promise you, he will."
Margaret hugged Fiona fiercely, and the little girl clung to her mother. They both jumped at the sound of the gentle knock at the small rear door. Holding her sobbing child against her, Margaret called for her knight to enter. Sir Alan entered the room, his face dark with concern.
"My lady, should I not be down with Lord Andrew?" he began courteously.
"No," Margaret interrupted. "You must take Fiona far away from him, away from here.
With a resounding bang, the heavy oak door of the room burst open, and a half-dozen soldiers rushed in, drawn swords in their hands. Instinctively, Alan pulled his own sword from its scabbard, stepping in front of his mistress. Margaret gripped Fiona's hand and started backing toward the rear chamber door. As her heart slammed in her chest, she knew that it was not her own life that she feared for, but the life of her own precious child.
"Holy Mother, Fiona is an innocent," she found herself praying. "Please help her. Please save her."
"What is the meaning of this outrage?"
the knight bellowed. Instead of answering, 4 soldiers charged at him. Gallantly, Alan parried the first blows of the onslaught, managing to shove one of the assailants clear across the room. Slashing at the soldiers, Alan managed to plunge his brand into one of the men where the shoulder meets the neck. But before he could pull his sword out of the dying man, 2 of the other soldiers found their chance. Their swords pierced his chest and his back, the blades crossing somewhere between his ribs. The valiant knight was dead before he hit the floor. The assailants then turned on Fiona and Margaret, who watched in horror as the killers approached them. Quickly recovering, Margaret drew Fiona behind her as she pulled a small dagger from her belt. Slowly they continued backing toward the door.
"Stay behind me,"
Margaret commanded in a voice that shook with emotion.
"These animals will not dare to harm—"
Suddenly, Fiona felt herself being lifted high into the air. Twisting her body, she tried desperately to dive toward her mother. But a huge man, bigger than Sir Alan, held her with a vice-like grip that sent shockwaves of pain shooting down her arms. Turning her head, she glimpsed the ugly scarred face and the wild unkempt beard of the grinning madman who held her. From the corner of her eye, she saw that another man had taken hold of her mother's arms and wrenched the knife from her hand. Reacting to her mother's cries, Fiona felt her body stiffen with anger. Suddenly something snapped within her, and all her fear vanished. She was a whirlwind of motion, arms and legs flying in all directions at once. Wildly, Fiona kicked hard at the man's stomach, sinking her teeth into his massive paw at the same time. Her attacker snapped his hand away, and Fiona swung loose for a moment. Twisting her arm, she kicked again hard at his midsection, this time causing the man to throw her away from him.
"The devil!"
Fiona landed on her hands and knees, but quickly scampered to her feet, eyeing the ugly man defiantly.
"Are you going to let this wee thing best you, my lord?"
one of the soldiers sneered.
"She's a demon!"
the Goliath roared, taking a step toward the girl. Fiona looked around her wildly. She could see that both doors were blocked. There was no way out. Running to the window, she picked up the stool and rushed toward the men who were holding her struggling mother. Throwing the stool at one, she bit down on the hand of the other before being grabbed by the hair from behind. The man yanked her head back roughly and jerked her around to face him. His fist hung in the air, his eyes clouded with fury.
"I'm going to teach you how we deal with demon bairns where I come from."
Fiona's eyes shot darts of defiance into the Highlander's face.
"If you hurt me," she hissed, "my papa will kill you."
A look of shock flickered into the man's face as his fist opened. Then his black eyes narrowed into a hardness that froze Fiona's blood.
"Where you are going, your almighty papa will never find you,"
he growled menacingly. Dragging her toward the rear door, past Margaret, who had been gagged, the leader flung the little girl at one of his men.
"Take her down,"
he spat. "Now!"
"Should we wait for you in the courtyard, Torquil?"
the man clutching Fiona asked. Fiona tried to jerk her hand free, but the captor twisted her arm behind her back, taking hold of her hair with vicious force.
"No, I'll catch up,"
the man responded gruffly. He turned with a sneer toward Margaret.
"We have a very sad occurrence that needs to take place here."
A look of horror came into Margaret's eyes, and she cast a final look at her daughter as they dragged the screaming child from the room. Lord Grey, Margaret Drummond's uncle, was the first to discover his niece's body. The shocking news travelled like a thunderbolt through the countryside. Strangers had kidnapped Margaret's daughter, Fiona. On the eve of such momentous expectations, after waiting 2 long years for the return of the child's father, this loss had proved too much for Margaret. She had lost all sense. In despair, she had taken her own life, poisoning herself in her daughter's room. They had found the note she left, professing that life was not worth living without her child. People searched high and low throughout the Scottish countryside, but the fruitless effort was curtailed a fortnight later when the worst gale in 50 years tore across Scotland, spreading havoc and destruction from the Outer Hebrides and the Isle of Skye to the Firth of Forth and Edinburgh itself. Neither the child nor her kidnappers were ever found, and those who loved her wept, thinking her dead. Chapter 1. The nut's shell, though it be hard and tough, holds the kernel, sweet and delectable. Robert Henryson, The Fables. Dunvegan Castle, the Isle of Skye, June 1516. He could hardly breathe. The bodies of those around him were pressing so close that he felt he could not even lift his arms. And there were faces that looked so familiar, but that he could not put names to. Then, just beyond them, he could see King James looking at him with pleading eyes.
"What is it, my lord?"
he heard himself ask. His voice came from far away, as if from somewhere inside his head. He wondered if the words had even been uttered. He tried to move toward the king, but the bodies were now pressing against him even more tightly than before. Then, like the surge of an ocean current, they pushed and carried him with excruciating slowness away from his king. Alec continued to look at the king, following his gaze when James turned his face toward the murky shadows beyond. Looking past him, Alec could see a door was opening. A cloud of mist streamed through the opening, swirling as it poured through the door. Suddenly, he was blinded by the shimmering light of 1,000 suns. Then that brilliance was eclipsed by another sight, the vision of an angel stepping through the door. Her red hair flowed about her in endless waves and framed a face of pure perfection. From where he stood, Alec could see her eyes, crystalline, radiating a spectrum of colours. Those eyes found his and drew him toward her with an unspoken promise of fulfilment. Light and warmth swept over him. His eyes were riveted on the dazzling creation. Alec saw the king move toward the angel, beckoning to him with one hand and, with the other, reaching for the light. But he couldn't move. Alec tried desperately to fight the current, carrying him away, but to no avail. He was carried farther and farther away from the light and the vision. More and more he felt his breath being crushed from his body. Struggling for air, Alec could see the light receding. He could see his angel disappearing. He was suffocating. He had to somehow get back to his king, to the light. He could hardly breathe. Gasping for air, Alec Macpherson sat bolt upright in his bed, sweat running down his chest and back. It was the same recurring dream. Throwing the covers aside, Alec vaulted from the bed. He looked around at the still darkened room. So cold, so large and cold and empty, he thought. The cool summer breeze flowed over his naked skin from the open slit of the window. The silence around him seemed like a tangible thing, pressing on him like a millstone, crushing him. Trying hard to rid himself of the dream, Alec walked to the window, stretching and breathing in deeply the misty salt air. Ever so slowly the sense of oppression that had gripped him began to ease. His eyes were drawn to the twin peaks of Helleval across the fog-shrouded waters of Loch Dunvegan. It didn't seem to matter how long he remained here at Dunvegan. It simply was not his home. He missed the noise, the life that existed at Benmore Castle. But then again, he thought, even being home had not been enough, had not helped. Looking out into the morning fog, he saw in his mind's eye the lingering images of the dream. This was the first time that he'd seen the face of the angel. Always before, she'd been nothing more than a light. But this time, Alec had seen her. She was flesh and blood. But who was she? King James IV had been dead for 3 years now, and Alec had fought beside him on that bloody day at Flodden Field, the day when the king had ignored all warnings and had challenged the English. The king had been cut down by an English arrow in a swarm of blood-crazed foot soldiers because Torquil MacLeod and others had held back their troops when they were most needed to save their country. That had been a bitter day for Scotland and for Alec. How strange, Alec thought, that after so long his dreams would now be invaded by his king's ghost and by the strange vision of the angel. 4 months ago, Alec Macpherson had arrived at Dunvegan Castle, and that was when the dreams had started. He had come here, certain that doing the Crown's work in this faraway corner of Scotland was what he needed. His life and his mind were all cluttered with events and people he just could not shake off. A false promise, a broken engagement, a faithless woman. Alec rubbed his face hard with his hands as if that act could somehow wipe away all thoughts, all traces of Catherine. Forcing his thoughts back to his dream, he wondered what the king could be trying to tell him. Why did he wait 3 years? Why did he come to him here? As the new Laird of Skye and the islands of the Outer Hebrides, Alec had hardly rested in his efforts to bring order to this wild and mysterious land that Torquil MacLeod had so barbarously ruled. Justice had finally caught up with the murderous MacLeod, but his execution for treason had left a great void in the power structure of the northwestern Highlands. Alec Macpherson, future chief of his own Highland clan, as well as a fearless warrior and well-known leader, had been given the task of correcting the ills of 30 years of brutal repression and securing the region for the new Stuart king. As he dressed for his morning ride, Alec thought over all that he had set out to do 4 months ago. It seemed to him he had been working night and day, and it was still a bit daunting to consider all that remained to be accomplished. He had arrived here with his own men, expecting resistance, even bloodshed. After all, he had not been chosen by these people to be their leader. He'd been made laird by the nobles of the Regency Council, and had been given the Isle of Skye to rule as his own. So Alec had been surprised by the reception of the men who had greeted him. The handful of soldiers still remaining at Dunvegan Castle were under the command of Neil MacLeod, a warrior crippled at Flodden, one of the few of this clan who had seemed to have fought loyally for his king. He and his men had peacefully submitted to Alec's will and had sworn to aid him in his royal commission. And indeed, Neil and his men had been true to their word. It was not long before Alec discovered that the people of Skye, the clans MacDonald and MacLeod, deserved better than they had been getting for so many years under Torquil. They were quite different from what he had expected. Yes, there were still small roving bands of rebel outlaws left in the outlying areas of the island, but aside from them, the crofters and the fishermen of Skye were, for the most part, good people. They were solid, common folk with strong beliefs in the old ways, people who, despite their treacherous leader, had somehow maintained a heritage of hospitality and decency, and, most importantly, dignity. And Alec could see that these people were beginning to trust him, to accept his commands in the spirit that they were given, to better the lot of all who depended on him. Alec strapped his sword to his side and pulled open the thick oak door leading from his tower room. The musty smell of the interior stairway assaulted his nostrils. This old tower was said to be nearly 300 years old. Dimly lit by a few narrow slits in the thick stone walls, it evoked the memory of childhood stories of fairies and sprites, kelpies and sorcerers. It was no surprise to Alec that the history of Skye was a brightly woven tapestry of fact and fantasy. But the castle had a proud and well-known history within its walls. It had withstood the assaults of Vikings and Celtic kings from the water and from the land. It had been an outpost of civilization when the Christian faith had first taken hold in this wild land.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?